Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where, as we say, nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the escalation in the military buildup in the Persian Gulf area and what it could mean for Karg Island. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, there's been lots of reports coming out of the United States that the Americans are now sending troop reinforcements to the Persian Gulf, and they're beefing up their numbers as well as their military hardware in the region. And I've got an article here from Axios. Pentagon prepares for massive final blow of Iran war. The Pentagon is developing military options for a final blow in Iran that could include the use of ground forces and a massive bombing campaign, according to two US officials and two sources with knowledge. Why it matters. A dramatic military escalation will grow more likely if no progress is made in diplomatic talks, and in particular if the Strait of Hormuz remain closed. Some US officials think a crushing show of force to conclude the fighting would create more leverage in peace talks, or simply give Trump something to point to and declare victory. Now, don't forget, Donald Trump has said that there are negotiations with the Iranians. However, he gave them a 2-day deadline, a 48-hour deadline. That had come, and as that deadline drew closer and it had reached, he then gave them a 5-day deadline. Now, that 5 days deadline coincides with the arrival of the first lot of military might that is being sent over from the United States, that is being sent over by the United States to the Gulf region. So that is something to bear in mind as that 5-day period deadline comes to an end, and these negotiations are in play. Donald Trump is basically fortifying all aspects of this conflict. He's going to negotiations, he's having backup in case the negotiations fail, and he's giving them a deadline that coincides with the day or the time when the first lot of their backup arrives. So he's then going to say to them, to the Iranians, look, well, he's by way of optics, he's saying to the Iranians, I'm sending a force. When that force arrives, he's saying to them, I'm ready. I'm locked and loaded and ready to go. And, he's hoping that, according to this article, and it makes sense to draw that inference, that the show of force or increased bombing will then, from his side, envisage a more amicable Iran within which to deal with. However, from the flip side of that is, a more stringent bombing campaign or a greater number of force in the region could embolden the hot-headed leaders within the IRGC and the Basij to continue their war, because again, it's an existential fight for them. So the article goes on further. Between the lines, Iran also has a say in how the war ends, and many of the scenarios under discussion would risk prolonging and intensifying the fight rather than bringing it to a dramatic conclusion. Zoom in. In interviews with Axios, officials and sources familiar with the internal discussions describe 4 major final blow options Trump could choose from: invading or blockading Karg Island, Iran's main oil export hub. So that is, what I suspect is going to happen. I suspect that those 82nd Airborne and some Marines and Delta Force and that's being sent in are being sent in to try and take Karg Island, because once that's done, then 90% of Iranian oil that is shipped out is now in the hands of the Americans. And if you look at it in a broader, if you zoom out, you look at it, once the Americans control the Iranian oil tap and the Venezuelan oil tap, they then control the amount of oil and the price at which it goes to the Chinese market. So rather than going militarily to China immediately, by increasing the price at which the Chinese then pay for oil, because if they were paying something like, I've heard figures of $46 a barrel, however, I believe it was, I'm certain they paid a lot less than that. And for the oil price to have now jumped up to, let's say, $100 a barrel, theoretically, that's more than double. That would adversely affect the Chinese economy. And, that would be one of the phases in which the Americans would begin to start weakening the Chinese before they go in for the coup de grace. Because I believe that a conflict with the Americans and the Chinese is an inevitability. I don't think it will occur during Trump's administration. However, I think that he is paving the way so that future administrations come in. They're going to, this is the route planned to that end game. So don't forget, while you have all these bipartisan politics going on, and Democrats and Republicans, and they're fighting over issues like tax hikes and tax cuts and things like that, the broader picture, the broader geopolitical picture is still in play. And that means that irrespective of who comes into power from which party, the broader aims have to be achieved. And that, I suspect, is going to war with China. Because the Americans cannot tolerate an empowered China threatening their hegemony within the world stage. They still want to be the sole superpower. So the article then goes on. The second point is invading Larak, an island that helps Iran solidify its control of the Strait of Hormuz. The strategic outpost hosts Iranian bunkers, attack craft, and that can blow up cargo ships, and radars that monitor movements in the strait. Seizing the strategic island of Abu Musa and two smaller islands which lie near the western entrance to the strait are controlled by Iran but also claimed by the UAE. So again, you're looking at him taking out strategic infrastructure on strategic islands. And should the United States control these islands, they then de-escalate the amount of retaliation that the Iranians can inflict within the Strait of Hormuz. So this is all a plan to try and take control of the strait, for want of a better word. And for blocking or seizing ships that are exporting Iranian oil on the eastern side of the Hormuz Strait. So don't forget, I think it was yesterday the BBC did an article where they spoke about two ghost tankers leaving the Iranian waterways. And, so there is seepage. And that seepage is probably ending up in China. However, the Americans now want to shut that tap down. And once they do that, it's a stranglehold on the Iranian regime, basically. So the intrigue. The US military has also prepared plans for ground operations deep inside the interior of Iran to secure the highly enriched uranium buried within nuclear facilities. Instead of conducting such a complicated and risky operation, the US could instead carry out large-scale airstrikes on the facilities to try to prevent Iran from ever accessing the material. So pretty much like what India did with Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. You hit the bunkers, you hit them so hard that I think it was the Sargodha or was it Kirana Hills? I'm not sure. One of them was hit so severely that it was just easier to have covered everything up and left it there because of the danger of trying to get in. So nobody knows what is in there, and it's just accessing it is a no-no. So that's basically what the Americans are looking to do here. And rather than sending ground troops where you would risk loss of lives and body bags coming back home, you rather bomb the place into oblivion and limit the Iranians' ability to then access that material because it's now buried. Trump could first implement his threat to bomb power plants and energy facilities in Iran, for which Tehran has threatened massive retaliation across the Gulf. But sources say he's ready to escalate if talks with Iran don't yield tangible results soon. So Trump hasn't made a decision yet on pursuing any of these scenarios, and White House officials describe any potential ground operations as hypothetical. Driving the news, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt warned Iran on Wednesday that Trump is ready to strike harder than ever before if no deal can be reached. The president doesn't bluff, and he is ready to unleash hell. Iran shouldn't miscalculate again. Any violence beyond this point will be because the Iranian regime refuses to come to a deal, Levitt added. State of play. More reinforcements, including several fighter jet squadrons and thousands of troops, are expected to arrive in the Middle East in the coming days and weeks. One Marine expeditionary unit will arrive this week and another is now deploying. The command element of the 82nd Airborne Division has been directed to deploy to the Middle East with an infantry brigade consisting of several thousand troops. The other side. Iranian officials have said they don't trust Trump's negotiation push and see it as a ruse to launch sneak attacks. Speaker of Parliament Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf wrote on X on Wednesday that Iranian intelligence suggests Iran's enemies, with the support of a country in the region, are preparing an operation to occupy one of Iran's islands. Ghalibaf was likely alluding to the UAE and its claim to Abu Musa. All enemy movements are under surveillance of our armed forces. If they take any action, all the vital infrastructure of that regional country will be targeted without limitation by relentless attacks, he added. What to watch? A source involved with the efforts to launch negotiations between the US and Iran said Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey are still trying to organize a meeting between the parties. The source said that while Iran rejected the initial US list of demands, it did not rule out negotiations altogether. But mistrust is the problem. The commanders of the IRGC are very skeptical, the source said, referring to the powerful Iranian military force. But the mediators haven't given up. So, this is, that's the article in Axios, and it's quite a comprehensive article. I think Trump's plan is go into negotiations, have the build-up of force, and depending on the way in which negotiations are going, then direct that force in the applicable manner. And I think that it's a strike on, or an invasion, a ground troop invasion on at least Karg Island, and that Abu Musa and those islands are going to be inevitable should the negotiations not go favorably as Donald Trump would like it, because by the Americans then controlling these vital choke points and the infrastructure on those choke points and what can leave the islands effectively, then they have a much better control of the Iranian economy in terms of black market money that they could be earning from oil being shipped out by these ghost tankers, but also they control what is being sent to China, and at the same time they've decimated the missile capabilities and drone capabilities situated within those islands. And then after that, I just suspect it's going to be a type of a carpet bombing operation where they suspect that nuclear material is being held. So we're keeping a close eye on this, and we'll keep you updated. I want to thank you for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.